6 months had passed since the Council broadcast their surrender. 6 months since the galaxy changed forever. Ambassador Lisa Grant stood once again in the Council chamber, but this time everything was different. The seating arrangement had been altered. Where once the Council members sat in a perfect circle around a central platform, now the circle included an additional seat, the human seat. Equal to all others, Lisa wore the same diplomatic uniform, but she carried herself differently now. Not with arrogance, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had proven their worth. Around her, the Council members watched with expressions ranging from respect to lingering resentment. Council Speaker Zarthon called the assembly to order. His voice had changed too. Less commanding, more collaborative. The Council had learned humility the hard way. Representatives, we gather today to finalize the Treaty of Terra Nova. This document will establish the formal relationship between the Galactic Council and the human species. Ambassador Grant, would you like to present the final terms? Lisa activated a holographic display showing the treaty document. It had taken months of negotiation, compromise, and occasionally heated debate. But they had reached an agreement that both sides could accept. The treaty establishes several key principles, Lisa began. First, humanity is recognized as a fully sovereign species with complete independence from Council governance. Our colonies, our laws, our future are ours to determine. Several Council members nodded. This part had been the easiest to agree upon. After the war, no one was willing to challenge human independence. Second, humanity will hold a permanent seat on the Council with full voting rights, including veto power on any measures that affect human interests. We will participate in galactic governance as equals, not as subjects. This had been more controversial. Representative Koromul had argued loudly that humans should earn their place over decades, not demand it immediately. But Elder Counselor Mirasol had pointed out that humans had already earned it through force of arms. Better to grant it willingly than have it taken. Third, the Council formally acknowledges responsibility for initiating hostilities. Reparations will be paid to families of human casualties and to colonies affected by the conflict. Zarthon winced slightly at this. The reparations weren't large by galactic standards, but the symbolic weight of the Council admitting fault was enormous. It had never happened before in 10,000 years. Fourth, and most importantly, the Council agrees to reduce its military forces by 60%. The remaining forces will be reorganized into a true defensive fleet, not an enforcement mechanism for political will. This was the part that had caused the most argument. Many Council members feared leaving themselves vulnerable, but General Frank Hayes had made the reality clear during negotiations. The Council's old military hadn't been able to defeat humanity. Building a bigger version of the same thing wouldn't help. Better to have smaller, more professional forces focused on actual defense against external threats. Finally, Lisa concluded, humanity agrees to share defensive technology and tactical training with Council forces. We will help you build a real military, one capable of protecting the galaxy from genuine threats, not from dissent but from danger. She deactivated the display and looked around the chamber. This treaty isn't about winners and losers. It's about creating a better system, one where all species have a voice, where strength is used for protection, not oppression, where governance comes from consent, not fear. Cormel stood, his multiple arms crossed. Ambassador Grant, you speak well of cooperation now. But 6 months ago your people destroyed 200 Council ships, killed thousands of our personnel. How do we know you won't turn on us again? Lisa met his gaze calmly. Representative Koromul, we destroyed those ships because we were defending our freedom. If you threaten that freedom again, yes, we'll fight again. But if you respect our sovereignty, if you treat us as equals, you'll find humans make excellent allies. We're loyal to our friends. We just don't tolerate bullies. Mirasol spoke up, her ancient voice carrying authority. I support the treaty. Humanity has proven they can wage war. Now they're offering to help us build peace. We should accept with gratitude. The vote was called. Of the 47 Council species, 41 voted in favor. 5 abstained. Only Cormel voted against, and even he looked like he was just making a point rather than seriously opposing. The treaty is ratified, Zarthon announced. Welcome, Ambassador Grant, to your permanent seat on the Galactic Council. Lisa moved from the central platform to her new seat. It felt strange, sitting among beings who had ruled the galaxy for millennia. But it also felt right. Humanity had earned this place. On Earth, celebrations erupted when the news arrived. General Frank Hayes watched the crowds in the streets, people laughing and crying and embracing. They had been prepared for a long war. Instead, they got peace and recognition. But Frank knew the hard work was just beginning. Winning the war had been the easy part. Building the peace would take decades. "General Captain Morrison is here to see you," his aide announced. Jake walked into Frank's office, looking more relaxed than he had in months. The Terran Defiant was in space dock for repairs and upgrades. Jake had been offered a promotion to admiral, but he'd turned it down. He preferred commanding a ship to pushing papers. "Jake, good to see you," Frank said, shaking his hand. "What brings you to headquarters?" "Just wanted to thank you, sir, for trusting us, for letting us do what needed to be done." Frank smiled. "You earned that trust. The Battle of the Frontier will be studied in military academies for centuries. You and your crew showed the galaxy what humans can do." "We showed them what humans will do when pushed," Jake corrected. "But I'm hoping we won't need to do it again. That's up to the Council, and to us. We need to prove we're more than just warriors." Jake nodded. "Commander Walsh is already working on that. She's been assigned to the Council Military Liaison Office. She'll be training their forces in modern combat doctrine, helping them build something actually capable of defense." "And Lieutenant Cole? Ben's getting his own command. A new frigate, the Defiance. He earned it. That kid flew through hell and came out the other side." Frank leaned back in his chair. "What about you, Jake? What's next for the captain who won the war?" Jake was quiet for a moment. "I'm thinking about that academy position you mentioned. Teaching the next generation, making sure they understand that victory isn't just about tactics and weapons. It's about knowing why you're fighting." "That's a good choice. We need people like you shaping the future." They talked for another hour, two warriors reflecting on what they'd been through and what came next. When Jake finally left, Frank sat alone in his office thinking about the weight of history. Humanity had taken its place on the galactic stage. Not through diplomacy or trade or cultural exchange, but through war. That was a sobering reality, but perhaps it was the only way. The Council had ruled through fear for so long, only a greater fear could break their grip. In the Council military headquarters, Commander Amy Walsh was conducting her first training session with Council forces. 50 officers from various species sat before her listening intently. "The first thing you need to understand," Amy said, "is that your old doctrine was designed to intimidate, not to fight. That's why you lost. Real military force isn't about having the biggest ships or the most impressive displays. It's about coordination, adaptability, and the willingness to take casualties to achieve objectives." A Velic officer raised his hand. "Commander Walsh, your forces took significant casualties in the battle. How did you maintain morale?" "Because we knew what we were fighting for," Amy replied. "Every human ship in that battle was crewed by volunteers, people who believed in the cause strongly enough to risk their lives. You can't force that kind of commitment. You have to earn it." Over the next weeks and months, Amy worked with Council forces to completely restructure their military. Smaller ships, more maneuverable, better weapons, faster reaction times. Most importantly, better training. Council officers learned to think like warriors instead of administrators, and slowly, grudgingly, they began to respect their human teacher. Lieutenant Ben Cole stood on the bridge of his new command, the Defiance. It was smaller than the Terran Defiant, a frigate rather than a cruiser, but it was his crew, his responsibility. "Captain on the bridge," someone called as he entered. "Captain." It still felt strange. 6 months ago, he'd been a junior officer flying a patrol craft. Now he commanded a warship and a crew of 200. "Status report," Ben ordered, settling into the command chair. "All systems green, Captain. We're cleared for departure. Take us out. Set course for the frontier. I want to see how our new partnership with the Council is working out there." The Defiance undocked smoothly and accelerated away from Earth. Ben watched his home world shrink in the view screen. Somewhere down there, his family was watching, proud and terrified in equal measure. He thought about everything that had happened. The war, the battle, the victory. He'd killed people in that fight. Council personnel who were just following orders, doing what they thought was right. That weight would stay with him forever, but he'd also saved. The emergency session of the Galactic Council took place in a massive chamber that floated in neutral space, far from any star system. Representatives from 12 major species sat in their designated areas, their forms ranging from humanoid to completely alien. At the center sat the High Arbiter, an ancient being whose species had helped found the Council millennia ago. The chamber buzzed with concerned conversation. Never in recorded history had a newly contacted species refused the Council's authority. Ambassador Zekthar stood before them all, his forearms spread wide in a gesture of dismay. He recounted his meeting with the humans, emphasizing their shocking defiance and their bizarre pride in their violent history. Several council members expressed disbelief. One representative, a floating crystalline being, suggested that perhaps the translation had been faulty. Surely the humans had not actually refused. Ambassador Zekthar assured them the translation was perfect. The humans had said no, and they had meant it. More troubling, they seemed prepared to fight. The High Arbiter called for order. The situation was unprecedented but not unmanageable. The Council would dispatch a significant military force to the human home system. When the primitives saw the might arrayed against them, they would understand their error and submit. It was simple psychology. Every species valued survival above pride. Commander Thalorus of the Vryn Third Fleet received his orders with confidence. He was a decorated officer with 3 centuries of service, though he had never actually fought in a war. No one living had. His fleet consisted of 200 warships, gleaming vessels designed as much for ceremony as combat. They were beautiful ships, works of art really, with flowing lines and decorative hulls. They had particle beam weapons and energy shields, all perfectly maintained but rarely used for anything beyond exercises and parades. As the Vryn fleet made its way toward Earth's solar system, Thalorus reviewed what little information they had about humans. They were a young species, barely a century into their space age. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards. Their ships were crude, built more like flying bunkers than proper vessels. Everything about them suggested they would be easy to intimidate. Back on Earth, Dr. Helen Carter was working around the clock analyzing intercepted alien communications. She had assembled a team of linguists, historians, and military analysts. What they discovered was fascinating and slightly terrifying. The galaxy had been at peace for so long that most species had no living memory of warfare. Military service was largely ceremonial. Their weapons existed but were rarely tested in actual combat conditions. She brought her findings to Admiral Bennett and President Hayes in a late-night briefing. The Admiral listened carefully, then asked the critical question. Did this mean the aliens would be easy to defeat? Dr. Carter shook her head. Their technology was still superior in many ways. Their numbers were overwhelming, but their tactics would likely be outdated, their crews inexperienced in actual combat. It gave Earth a chance, however small. Admiral Bennett smiled at that. A chance was all they needed. She had been working with Jake Morrison and other fleet commanders on battle plans. They were drawing inspiration from Earth's entire military history, from ancient naval tactics to modern space combat theory. The key was to be unpredictable, to do things the aliens would never expect. Captain Jake Morrison ran his pilots through brutal training simulations aboard the Defiant. He pushed them hard, running scenarios that seemed impossible. 3 ships against 20, fighting while retreating, using debris and asteroids as cover. His pilots complained that the simulations were unfair, that no one could win under those conditions. Jake's response was simple. The real battle would be even worse, so they had better learn fast. One of his best pilots, a young woman named Amy Rodriguez, approached him after a particularly difficult simulation. She asked him honestly what their chances were. Jake considered lying, offering false hope. But he respected her too much for that. He told her the truth. Their chances were not good. They were outnumbered and outgunned. But they had one advantage. They knew how to fight and the enemy did not. That would have to be enough. Meanwhile, engineer Kyle Sanders was working on something special in the shipyards orbiting Earth. He had been given a blank check to modify the fleet's weapon systems. The aliens used energy shields that were designed to deflect particle beams and energy weapons. They were very effective against that type of threat. But Kyle had an idea. What if they went old school? He began outfitting human ships with kinetic weapons, railguns that fired solid projectiles at incredible speeds, missile systems with nuclear warheads, even experimental weaponry that used focused gravity waves. These were weapons the aliens might not have adequate defenses against, simply because no one had used them in combat for thousands of years. It was a gamble, but then again, everything about this situation was a gamble. The Vryn fleet arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system 3 weeks after the ultimatum expired. Commander Thalorus surveyed the primitive star system with mild interest. He detected the human ships scattered throughout the system, most clustered near the fourth planet, a red, dusty world the humans called Mars. His sensors counted roughly 300 vessels. He had 200, but his were proper warships. The humans had no chance. He opened a communication channel, broadcasting on all frequencies. His message was simple and patronizing. The humans had made a grave error in judgment. But the Council was merciful. If they surrendered immediately and handed over their leadership for judgment, the rest of their species would be spared. They had 1 hour to comply. Aboard the Defiant, Jake Morrison listened to the alien commander's message and felt his anger spike. They were still talking like humanity was made up of children who needed to be punished. He looked at his crew, saw the same anger reflected in their faces. Good. Anger could be useful if channeled properly. Admiral Bennett's response came exactly 1 hour later. It was broadcast across all channels so both the human fleet and the alien force could hear it. Her voice was calm and cold. She thanked Commander Thalorus for traveling so far. Earth's answer remained the same as before. No. If the Vryn fleet wished to leave peacefully, they would not be hindered. If they wished to fight, humanity would oblige them. The choice was theirs. Commander Thalorus could not believe what he was hearing. These primitives were actually going to fight. It was absurd. It was insane. Very well. If they insisted on learning their lesson the hard way, he would teach them. He ordered his fleet into battle formation, a standard defensive sphere that had been used for centuries. It looked impressive and was designed to intimidate opponents into surrendering before shots were even fired. The human fleet responded by powering up weapon systems and beginning to advance. Thalorus watched his sensors in confusion. They were actually attacking. He gave the order to fire warning shots, beams of energy that streaked past the human ships without hitting them. It was standard procedure. Show the enemy what they faced, give them one last chance to retreat. Jake Morrison saw the energy beams flash past his ship and laughed without humor. Warning shots. The aliens were still treating this like a formal duel with rules and etiquette. He opened a channel to his squadron. It was time to show these visitors what human warfare actually looked like. He gave the order to attack at full speed. The Defiant and her sister ships accelerated hard, burning toward the alien formation at speeds that made the Vryn sensors flash warning signals. Thalorus ordered his ships to maintain formation and prepare to fire. But the humans were not attacking the way he expected. Instead of approaching in orderly lines, they were scattered, weaving unpredictably, making themselves difficult targets. The first exchange of fire shocked both sides. The Vryn particle beams were powerful, but the human ships seemed to know exactly when to dodge. Meanwhile, the weapons coming from the human vessels were unlike anything Thalorus had seen. Solid projectiles that punched through shields designed to deflect energy. Missiles that zigzagged and dodged point defense systems. Strange weapons that made his shields fluctuate and fail. One of his ships exploded, torn apart by a railgun strike that had hit its reactor. Then another. The humans were targeting specific systems with frightening accuracy. How did they know where to aim? The answer was simple, but Thalorus did not realize it. Humans had been building and destroying ships for centuries. They knew exactly where the weak points were. Jake Morrison led his squadron through the alien formation like a knife. His pilots flew with a recklessness that terrified their enemies. They used every trick in the book. One pilot deliberately let his ship's engines fail, drifting like a dead hulk until an alien ship came close to investigate, then fired at point-blank range. Another used the explosion of a destroyed alien vessel as cover to ambush 2 more ships on the other side. The battle that the Galactic Council expected to last less than an hour with minimal losses turned into a brutal 17-minute engagement that shattered the Vryn fleet's confidence. Commander Thalorus watched in horror as his perfectly maintained, beautifully designed ships were torn apart by primitive vessels that fought like rabid animals. The moment that broke him came when a damaged human ship, leaking. The news of the Vryn defeat traveled through the galaxy like a shockwave. On hundreds of worlds, species that had lived in comfortable peace for thousands of years suddenly felt something they had not experienced in living memory. They felt fear. The Galactic Council tried to control the narrative, releasing official statements that downplayed the battle. They called it a minor setback, a tactical miscalculation. But the truth leaked out anyway. Intercepted communications, eyewitness accounts from surviving Vrin crew members, and independent journalists all told the same story. A human fleet 1/7 the size of the Vrin force had won a decisive victory. The Invincible Council had been beaten. On the Council's homeworlds there were protests. Some demanded immediate peace negotiations with humanity. Others called for total war, insisting that the humans must be crushed before their defiance inspired other species to rebel. The council chambers, usually calm and orderly, became scenes of heated argument and recrimination. Ambassador Zekthar watched the chaos with growing concern. He had dealt with humans more than any other council member, and he understood them better than most. He tried to explain to his colleagues that humanity was not like other species. They did not think about conflict in terms of cost and benefit. They thought about it in terms of principles. They would rather die fighting than live as subjects. His warnings fell on deaf ears. The council had made its decision. 3 major military powers within the council structure would combine their fleets. The Vrin would send 400 ships to redeem their honor. The Kryn Dominion would contribute 600 of their heavy battle cruisers. The Sithak Collective would provide 500 vessels specialized in siege warfare. Along with support ships and auxiliaries from smaller members, the total force would number over 1,500 warships. It was the largest military mobilization the galaxy had seen in 3,000 years. The council members convinced themselves it was necessary. Once humanity saw this armada, they would surely surrender. No rational species would fight against such overwhelming odds. But they still did not understand that humanity's relationship with rationality was complicated at best. On Earth, Lieutenant Emma Stone led the intelligence division tasked with monitoring alien communications. She worked from a secure facility buried deep under the Rocky Mountains, where banks of computers analyzed every signal they could intercept from across the galaxy. The picture they painted was troubling. Emma had discovered that 3 major alien factions were mobilizing. She tracked ship movements, analyzed supply requests, and intercepted strategic communications. Her team built a comprehensive picture of the coming assault. When she presented her findings to Admiral Bennett and President Hayes, the room fell silent. The numbers were worse than anyone had feared. Admiral Bennett studied the projections. 1,500 warships against Earth's fleet of 300. And that was counting every vessel they could get combat ready. Even with the advantage of fighting in their home system, even with their superior tactics and training, the math was brutal. She asked Emma the question everyone was thinking. Could they win? Emma was honest. Her analysis suggested Earth would lose approximately 70% of its fleet in the first day of fighting. After that, defeat was almost certain unless something changed dramatically. But she also noted something interesting in the alien communications. There was fear in those messages. The aliens were scared of humanity in a way they had not been scared of anything in millennia. President Hayes seized on that observation. Fear could be a weapon. If they could make the aliens more afraid, perhaps they could win a psychological victory even if military victory was impossible. He asked Dr. Helen Carter, who was also present at the briefing, what would frighten the aliens most. Dr. Carter had been studying alien psychology since first contact. She explained that most species in the galaxy viewed warfare as something ancient and barbaric, something their ancestors did before civilization. The Vrin defeat had shocked them because it revealed that humans still lived in that barbaric state. If they wanted to truly terrify the galaxy, they needed to embrace that image. They needed to show the aliens that humanity was not just willing to fight, but enthusiastic about it. The plan that emerged from that meeting was desperate, but potentially effective. Earth would not just defend itself. It would go on the offensive. They would use every psychological advantage they had. They would broadcast messages designed to unnerve the enemy. They would employ tactics so aggressive and unconventional that the aliens would not know how to respond. They would turn humanity's violent history from a source of shame into a weapon of terror. Captain Jake Morrison received new orders that made him smile despite the gravity of the situation. Admiral Bennett was giving her commanders unprecedented freedom to improvise and take risks. The only rule was to win. How they did it was up to them. For a species raised on stories of bold captains and daring tactics, it was almost perfect. Jake gathered his squadron commanders for a planning session aboard the Defiant. Among them was Commander Greg Foster, a veteran pilot known for his aggressive flying style, and Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, who had proven herself in the first battle. They reviewed the intelligence reports and discussed possibilities. Greg suggested they should use the asteroid belt as a battlefield. The aliens would expect a defensive position near Earth or Mars, but fighting among the asteroids would neutralize their numbers advantage. They could use the rocks as cover and turn the battlefield into a deadly maze. Amy added that they should abandon traditional formations entirely. Let every ship captain make their own decisions, create chaos that the alien command structure could not adapt to quickly enough. Jake approved both ideas and added his own. They would use psychological warfare broadcasts during the battle. Humans had been very good at that during their own wars, demoralizing enemies with propaganda and threats. If it worked on other humans, it might work on aliens who had never experienced anything like it. Meanwhile, engineer Kyle Sanders had been working on new surprises for the alien fleet. His team had developed experimental weapons that pushed the boundaries of physics and good sense. One project involved using focused gravity waves to tear apart enemy ships at the molecular level. Another was a type of computer virus designed to infect alien navigation systems. Kyle knew these weapons were dangerous and barely tested, but desperate times called for desperate measures. One evening, as Earth prepared for the coming storm, President Hayes received an unexpected communication. It came through secure channels that should have been impossible for outsiders to access. The message was from a species called the Kethril, a smaller member of the Galactic Council that humanity had barely heard of. The Kethril representative appeared on screen. She was a humanoid figure with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. Her name was difficult to pronounce, so she offered to be called Dana for human convenience. She explained that the Kethril had been oppressed by the larger council members for centuries. They had watched humanity's defiance with hope. If humans could stand up to the council, perhaps others could too. Dana offered to help. The Kethril had access to intelligence that Earth did not. They knew the exact composition of the coming fleet, the command structures, the communication protocols. More importantly, they knew the weaknesses of each alien ship class. She transmitted files containing technical specifications that Earth's intelligence services could never have obtained on their own. President Hayes was cautious. This could be a trap. But Dr. Carter examined the data and confirmed it matched what they already knew about alien technology. The additional information was incredibly detailed and would give Earth's forces a significant advantage. They decided to accept the Kethril's help, while remaining alert for any signs of betrayal. Emma Stone's intelligence team worked day and night analyzing the new information. They identified critical vulnerabilities in alien shield systems, discovered that Kryn heavy cruisers had poor maneuvering capability, and learned that Scythac siege ships relied on predictable firing patterns. Each piece of information was passed to fleet commanders who incorporated it into their battle plans. As the days passed, the alien armada assembled at a staging point just outside human-controlled space. Grand Admiral Vorthek of the Kryn Dominion took command of the combined fleet. He was an old warrior by his species standards, over 2 centuries old, though he had never fought in an actual war. His appointment was political, meant to show unity among the council members. He reviewed the force under his command and felt confident. How could he not? He had 1,500 warships against a few hundred primitive vessels, but Vorthek was not entirely comfortable. He had read the reports from the Vryn defeat carefully. The human tactics had been shocking in their brutality and creativity. He issued orders to his fleet commanders to expect the unexpected, to maintain strict formation discipline, and to follow doctrine precisely. He believed that superior numbers and organization would overcome any tactical surprises the humans might attempt. On Earth, the final preparations were complete. Every ship that could fly had been pressed into service. Civilian vessels had been hastily armed. The alien armada moved through space like a vast metal cloud, 1,500 warships arranged in precise formations that had been perfected over centuries of peace. Grand Admiral Vorthek sat in the command center of his flagship, a massive vessel called the Eternal Judgment, and watched his tactical displays with satisfaction. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. His 3 battle groups were moving into position to surround the inner solar system. The human fleet had been detected near Mars, just as his intelligence predicted. They appeared to be in a defensive formation, waiting for the inevitable assault. Vorthek allowed himself a moment of pity for them. They were brave, certainly, but bravery without wisdom was just another form of foolishness. He opened a channel to his fleet commanders. In 12 hours, they would be in optimal firing position. The humans would be completely surrounded with no avenue of escape. He ordered his forces to maintain formation and advance steadily. There was no need to rush. Victory was certain, but on Earth, Admiral Lisa Bennett was watching her own displays with a very different expression. Everything was proceeding exactly as she had hoped. The aliens were moving into position with predictable precision, following doctrine that was thousands of years old. They thought the human fleet was waiting near Mars. What they did not know was that most of those ships were actually decoys, converted civilian vessels broadcasting military transponder codes. The real human fleet was scattered throughout the solar system, hiding in the shadows of asteroids behind moons, even in the magnetic interference zones of Jupiter. They had gone completely silent, their reactors powered down to minimum levels, waiting like hunters in the darkness. It was a desperate gamble. If the aliens detected them too early, the plan would fail. But if they could pull off the surprise, they might just have a chance. Captain Jake Morrison floated in zero gravity aboard the Defiant, which was currently tucked behind a large asteroid in the belt between Mars and Jupiter. His ship was running on emergency power only, just enough to keep life support and sensors active. Around him, his crew waited in tense silence. They had been in position for 6 hours now, and the waiting was almost worse than fighting. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez whispered a question from the pilot's station. "How much longer?" Jake checked his tactical display. The alien fleet was still moving into position. Another 5 hours minimum. He told his crew to get some rest while they could. When the fighting started, it would be intense and brutal. They needed to be sharp. Across the solar system, similar scenes played out on 300 human warships. Crews waited in darkened vessels, conserving power and checking their weapons for the 100th time. Engineers made last-minute adjustments to the experimental systems that Kyle Sanders had developed. Pilots reviewed attack patterns and memorized target priorities. Everyone knew their role. Now they just needed the courage to execute it. Grand Admiral Vorthek's fleet reached their assigned positions right on schedule. His 3 battle groups formed a sphere around the inner solar system with Earth at the center. He studied his tactical display and felt satisfaction. The human fleet near Mars was trapped. He gave the order to begin the assault. 600 ships from his main battle group started moving toward the decoy fleet, weapons charging. That was when Admiral Bennett sprang her trap. All across the solar system, human ships came alive at once. Reactors surged to full power. Weapon systems activated. 300 warships appeared on Vorthek's sensors simultaneously, emerging from hiding spots throughout the solar system. But they were not where they should be. They were everywhere. The first attacks came from behind Vorthek's own fleet. Jake Morrison led his squadron out from the asteroid belt at full acceleration, targeting the rearmost ships of the alien formation. His pilots had rehearsed this attack run dozens of times. They knew exactly what to do. The Defiant opened fire with its railguns at close range, punching through the shields of a Kryn heavy cruiser before its crew even realized they were under attack. At the same moment, human ships attacked from 6 different directions. Commander Greg Foster brought his squadron screaming in from behind Jupiter's moon system, hitting the alien fleet's left flank. Other human groups struck from above and below the orbital plane. The aliens had been hunting for a traditional defensive battle. Instead, they got ambushed from multiple directions at once. Chaos erupted throughout the alien fleet. Ship commanders screamed for orders. Vorthek tried to reorganize his formation, but the humans were not fighting like any enemy he had studied. They refused to form proper battle lines. Instead, they operated in small groups, hitting hard and then breaking away before the aliens could respond effectively. It was like trying to fight smoke. The human weapons were also causing problems that Vorthek had not anticipated. Those primitive kinetic weapons that the Council had mocked were shredding through shield systems designed to deflect energy. Missiles with nuclear warheads created massive electromagnetic pulses that disrupted alien electronics. And then there were the strange new weapons that Kyle Sanders had developed. One Scythac siege ship found itself under attack from a weapon it could not understand. The ship's hull began to tear apart at the molecular level, pulled in different directions by competing gravity fields. The crew abandoned ship in terror as their vessel literally came apart like wet paper. Nearby alien ships watched in horror and tried to retreat, spreading fear through their formation. Admiral Bennett coordinated the battle from Earth's military command center, deep underground. She watched her display as human ships danced through the alien formation, never staying in one place long enough to be cornered. Her plan was working better than she had dared hope. But she knew this was just the opening act. The aliens still outnumbered them 5-1. Eventually, the sheer weight of numbers would tell. She activated a communication system that broadcast on all frequencies, both to her own ships and to the alien fleet. It was time for the psychological warfare component of their strategy. What came through the speakers was a sound no alien in the fleet had heard before outside of historical recordings. It was a human war cry, a primal scream of aggression and defiance, broadcast by thousands of human crew members simultaneously. The effect on the alien crews was immediate and unsettling. This was not how civilized species fought. Where were the formal challenges? The negotiations for surrender? The structured combat protocols? Instead, these humans fought like wild animals, screaming and attacking from everywhere at once with no apparent regard for their own safety. Jake Morrison's squadron pressed their attack on the alien rear guard. They had already destroyed or disabled 8 enemy ships, but the aliens were starting to organize a response. A group of Vryn cruisers turned to engage them, firing their particle beams in coordinated patterns. Jake ordered his squadron to scatter, and they broke formation in 6 different directions. One of his pilots, a young man named Chris Taylor, took a direct hit. His ship's shields collapsed and the beam carved through his hull. Chris managed to eject in an escape pod, but his ship was gone. Jake felt the loss like a punch to the gut, but there was no time to mourn. He continued his attack run, targeting the Vryn cruiser's engines. The aliens were using formation tactics from their training manuals. Jake had read those same manuals thanks to Kethril intelligence. He knew exactly where they would move next. The Defiant fired a spread of missiles that forced the Vryn cruisers to adjust their position to avoid them. Jake had counted on that. As the cruisers moved, they exposed their flank to Commander Greg Foster's squadron, which had been waiting in ambush. Greg's ships tore into the exposed alien vessels with concentrated fire. 3 Vryn cruisers exploded in rapid succession, but the aliens were learning. Grand Admiral Vorthek stopped trying to maintain his perfect formation and divided his fleet into smaller battle groups that could respond more flexibly. He ordered his commanders to stop following standard doctrine and instead focus on destroying any human ship they could catch. If the humans wanted chaos, he would give them chaos. The battle devolved into dozens of separate engagements spread across millions of kilometers. Human ships used every dirty trick they had learned from centuries of warfare. They hid behind debris from destroyed vessels. They used gravity assist from planets to gain speed for attack runs. One human captain even rammed his damaged ship into an alien cruiser, destroying both vessels but taking out a ship that was far more valuable than his own. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez found herself in the fight of her life. Her fighter squadron was engaged with a group of alien interceptors that were faster and better armed than her ships. But the alien pilots flew with mechanical precision, following formation protocols. Amy threw her fighters into wild, unpredictable maneuvers that no training manual would ever recommend. Her pilots complained that she was going to kill them with her flying. She told them that was better than letting the aliens do it. Her crazy flying style worked. The alien pilots could not predict what she would do next because she barely knew herself. She dove toward an asteroid at full speed, pulling up at the last possible second. 3 alien fighters behind her could not react fast enough and slammed into the silence after the battle was almost deafening. For 3 days, Earth's solar system was filled with the sounds of rescue operations, repair crews working around the clock, and memorial services for the fallen. Captain Jake Morrison attended 17 funerals in those 3 days, standing in dress uniform as the bodies of pilots and crew members he had known were committed to space. Each one felt like a piece of his soul being torn away. The Defiant was in bad shape. Engineers said it would take months to repair all the damage. Jake walked through the scarred corridors of his ship, seeing blast marks and emergency patches everywhere. But the ship had survived, and so had most of his crew. That was more than many could say. Of the 300 ships that had fought in the Battle of Sol, 97 were completely destroyed. Another 100 were so damaged they might never fly again. Earth's fleet had been gutted, but they had won. That fact echoed across the galaxy like thunder. The mighty Galactic Council, unchallenged for thousands of years, had sent 1,500 warships to crush a primitive species. Instead, they had lost over 600 vessels and been forced to retreat in chaos. The news spread through every civilized system, and with it came something the galaxy had not felt in millennia. Change. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session for the third time in as many weeks. But this time, the atmosphere was different. There was no arrogance, no confidence in their supreme authority. Instead, there was fear and uncertainty. Representatives shouted at each other, blaming one another for the disaster. Several smaller species demanded to know why they should continue following a council that could not even defeat a single primitive world. Ambassador Zekthar stood before the chaos and called for order. When the chamber finally quieted, he spoke with unusual emotion. He had warned them about humanity, he reminded the council. He had told them these beings were different. Now they had learned that lesson the hard way. The question was what they would do next. Some representatives demanded another military assault, this time with even more ships. But those calls sounded hollow now. How many ships would be enough? 10,000? 20,000? And how many species would be willing to send their children to die against an enemy that fought with such savage effectiveness? The truth was settling in. Military conquest of Earth was possible, but it would be incredibly costly. Perhaps too costly. Others suggested a complete blockade of the human solar system, cutting them off from the rest of the galaxy. But that plan had problems too. Humanity had already proven they could build impressive technology in isolation. Given time and motivation, who knew what weapons they might develop? And now other species were watching, learning from the human example. A blockade might work for a while, but it would not solve the underlying problem. Ambassador Zekthar proposed something radical. What if they tried something the Council had not done in thousands of years? What if they negotiated with humanity as equals, not as a superior power granting concessions to inferiors, but as one civilization speaking honestly with another? The suggestion was met with shock and outrage from the older, more traditional Council members. But it was also met with thoughtful silence from many others. On Earth, President Daniel Hayes faced his own difficult decisions. The victory had come at a terrible cost. Tens of thousands of people were dead. The fleet was in ruins. Earth's economy was straining under the weight of military spending. And everyone knew the aliens could come back with even more ships if they chose to. The question was whether Earth should seek peace or prepare for round 3. Dr. Helen Carter provided analysis that shaped Hayes's thinking. She explained that the aliens were genuinely frightened now. Fear could make them more dangerous, but it could also make them more reasonable. The key was to offer them a path forward that did not require them to lose face completely. Give them a way to accept Earth's independence without admitting they had been wrong all along. Admiral Lisa Bennett met with Jake Morrison and her other commanders to assess their military readiness. The truth was sobering. If the aliens came back soon with another massive fleet, Earth would lose. They simply did not have enough ships or resources left to fight another major battle. Their only hope was to buy time, rebuild the fleet, and hope that the political situation in the galaxy shifted in humanity's favor. Jake shared something interesting from his pilot's reports. During the battle, they had intercepted communications from some alien ships that suggested not all of them wanted to be there. Some species within the Council were apparently less enthusiastic about the war than others. That information gave President Hayes an idea. He reached out through secure channels to the Kethril, the species that had helped Earth with intelligence during the battle. The Kethril representative Dana responded immediately. Her people were celebrating the human victory, she explained. For the first time in centuries, they felt hope that change might be possible. Hayes asked if she could arrange communications with other dissatisfied Council members. Over the next few weeks, a quiet diplomatic revolution took place. President Hayes, with help from Dr. Carter and Ambassador Zekthar, who secretly supported reform, began building a coalition of species who wanted a different kind of galactic council. Not one based on domination and fear, but on genuine cooperation and mutual respect. It was a delicate process, but slowly it gained momentum. The turning point came when Ambassador Zekthar officially broke with the hardline council leadership and called for formal peace negotiations with Earth. His status as a senior member from a founding species gave weight to his proposal. When Dana and representatives from 6 other species joined his call, the movement became impossible to ignore. The formal negotiations took place on a neutral space station, neither in Council territory nor near Earth. President Hayes led the human delegation, accompanied by Admiral Bennett and Dr. Carter. The Council sent a large group of representatives, though notably without the hardliners who had pushed for war. Ambassador Zekthar served as a mediator, a role he took seriously. The first sessions were tense. The Council representatives wanted assurances that Earth would not become an aggressive expansionist power. They had seen what human military capabilities looked like, and they were terrified of facing that on the offensive. Hayes assured them that humanity had no interest in conquest. They had fought purely in self-defense. All they wanted was to be left alone to develop on their own terms. But Earth also had demands. They wanted recognition as an independent power, not a subordinate member of the Council. They wanted the right to keep their military and defend themselves. They wanted fair access to trade and technology exchange with other species. And they wanted protection for species like the Kethril, who had been oppressed under the old Council system. The negotiations lasted for weeks. There were moments when it seemed they would collapse entirely, but slowly, carefully, a framework emerged. Earth would share its quantum drive technology, but gradually, through licensed agreements rather than forced surrender. In exchange, the Council would share other technologies that Earth needed. Humanity would join the Council, but as a permanent member with veto power over any military actions. Most importantly, the Council would reform its governance to give smaller species more voice and protection. While the diplomats talked, life on Earth slowly returned to something like normal. Jake Morrison was promoted to Commodore and given command of a new squadron. The promotion came with a desk job which he hated, but he understood the necessity. The fleet needed experienced leaders, and he had proven himself in the fire of battle. Lieutenant Emma Stone's intelligence division became the foundation for a new diplomatic corps dedicated to understanding alien species and cultures. The galaxy was more complex than humanity had realized, and they needed experts who could navigate that complexity. Emma threw herself into the work with enthusiasm, determined that Earth would never again face a crisis because they misunderstood their neighbors. Engineer Kyle Sanders found himself in high demand. His experimental weapons had worked far better than anyone expected, and now both human and alien scientists wanted to collaborate with him. He established a research institute dedicated to developing technology for peaceful purposes, though everyone understood that the same innovations could be weaponized if necessary. The galaxy had learned that humanity could fight. Now Kyle wanted to show them that humans could also build and create. 6 months after the Battle of Sol, the treaty was finalized. Earth officially joined the Galactic Council as a full member with all rights and privileges. The Council itself was restructured with new governance mechanisms that gave smaller species protection from the whims of larger powers. It was a new era for galactic civilization, one born from conflict but hopefully leading to genuine peace. The formal ceremony took place in the Council's Grand Chamber. President Hayes stood at the podium as Earth's first representative to the Council. He looked out at the assembled aliens, species from across the galaxy, and chose his words carefully. He thanked them for welcoming humanity and expressed hope for friendship and cooperation. But he also made something very clear. Earth had not fought for the right to be liked or accepted. They had